In Laboratory Reddit, today's story is...
My mother-in-law publicly humiliated me for wanting to organize Thanksgiving, but when her dinner ended in disaster, she blamed me in front of the whole family. What I did next destroyed her. Thanksgiving has always been my favorite celebration. It wasn't just the food or the decorations, but the feeling of togetherness, the shared laughter, and the stories that made this day so special. This year I would finally have the opportunity to organize the celebration. My husband and I had moved into our first house, and I had been dreaming about this moment for months. I spent weeks planning the menus, searching for recipes on the internet, and even trying out some dishes to make sure everything would turn out perfectly. I wanted a combination of traditional dishes like turkey and stuffing, along with some personal touches like my renowned pumpkin cheesecake, and a mix of roasted vegetables that I knew my husband loved. It was going to be an unforgettable Thanksgiving, or at least that was the plan. When I mentioned my intentions to organize the celebration during a family gathering, I expected some enthusiasm or perhaps some suggestions. Instead, my mother-in-law's reaction was immediate and sharp. She laughed, not in a kind or funny way, but in a derogatory, almost mocking way. She said she admired my enthusiasm, but that hosting Thanksgiving was not something you could just decide to do. It required experience, skill, and a deep knowledge of family traditions that, according to her, I simply did not possess. She added that Thanksgiving was a sacred tradition in her family, and that the right to organize it had to be earned. At first, I tried to defend my position. I explained that I had already started the preparations, and that I wanted to create new traditions for my husband and me as we started our own family. But she wouldn't budge. She said it was too important to risk a rookie mistake ruining the day, and declared that she would host. The rest of the family remained uncomfortably silent, except for a few approving nods from her loyal allies, such as my sister-in-law. My husband, Matt, tried to mediate, suggesting that perhaps we could co-host or divide up the responsibilities. But my mother-in-law quickly dismissed that idea, saying that there could not be two captains steering the same ship. I left that conversation feeling defeated and humiliated. It wasn't just that she had taken the opportunity away from me. It was the way she had completely dismissed me, as if I wasn't capable of handling something as basic as organizing a family meal. Over the next few weeks, preparations for my mother-in-law's Thanksgiving intensified. She sent detailed emails with seating assignments, dress code, and a strict itinerary for the day. From time to time, she would make an indirect comment about how much work it took to plan an event of this magnitude and how she hoped everyone would appreciate her efforts. I tried to focus on the positive. At least I wouldn't have the stress of cooking for a large group, and I could sit back and enjoy the holiday. But the closer Thanksgiving got, the more I was affected by his hints. He would call me to ask Matt's opinion on the wine pairing, deliberately excluding me from the conversation. Or he would casually mention how difficult it was to find a turkey that met his high standards, implying that I wouldn't have known where to start. Matt noticed my frustration and tried to console me, but his attempts often seemed more a way of appeasing me than genuine support. He said I shouldn't take it personally, that his mother was simply clinging to her traditions and didn't mean anything by it. He assured me that once she saw how capable I was, she would change her mind. But her words sounded empty, especially since he was not willing to stand up to her and defend me. As the big day approached, I decided to stand back. If she wanted to take care of everything, I would let her. I promised myself that I wouldn't lift a finger unless she asked for help. And even then, I would act cautiously. The day before Thanksgiving, my mother-in-law called to remind me of the dress code, cocktail attire, because apparently this wasn't just a family gathering, but a formal event. She also reminded me to arrive early to help with the preparation, even though I had made it clear that I wasn't part of the planning. I held my tongue and agreed, not wanting to give her any more reason to criticize me. That night, as I prepared my dress and prepared myself for the next day, I couldn't help feeling resentment growing inside me. I had wanted so much to create something special for my family, to start a new chapter in our lives, and instead I was being treated like a guest at my own celebration. On Thanksgiving morning, Matt and I arrived at my mother-in-law's house an hour before the rest of the family. The kitchen was a hive of activity, with pots boiling on the stove, dishes piled in the sink, and my mother-in-law barking orders at anyone who got close enough to hear. She looked me up and down and said she hoped I was ready to help, adding that she had serious doubts about my culinary skills but was willing to give me a chance. Her tone was so condescending that I almost left on the spot. Instead, I smiled tightly and asked how I could help. She handed me a pile of vegetables to peel and cut, and then she watched me the whole time, criticizing my technique, making disparaging comments about how long I was taking, and by the time the rest of the family arrived, I was about to explode. As everyone settled down and the appetizers were served, I tried to concentrate on enjoying the day, but my mother-in-law wasn't finished yet. She made sure to announce how much effort she had put into the meal, listing each dish she had prepared and how long it had taken her. She said she hoped everyone appreciated her sacrifices, especially since she had taken on the responsibility of ensuring that everything was perfect. I looked at Matt hoping he would say something to divert her attention, but he was too busy chatting with his father to notice. I felt completely alone, trapped in a situation where I couldn't win no matter what I did. I sat there smiling through gritted teeth and nodding politely to her insinuations. I took comfort in the thought that one day I would prove her wrong, but it didn't take long for everything to fall apart. The atmosphere at my mother-in-law's house was on the verge of collapse, although no one dared to mention it. My mother-in-law maintained her facade of control, but not even her rigorous schedule could prevent the inevitable. The first sign of trouble came with the appetizers. My mother-in-law had previously bragged about her famous cheese board, claiming it was the family favorite. But when the guests started to sample them, there were murmurs because some of the cheeses were past their sell-by date. Uncle Rick winced after taking a bite, whispering that the flavor was too intense. My mother-in-law, noticing his reaction, quickly explained that it was supposed to have a strong European flavor. Despite everything, she went ahead with her plan. The dining room had been decorated to perfection with matching tablecloths and personalized name cards, as if she were hosting a dinner for royalty. My mother-in-law smiled as everyone took their seats, clearly expecting admiration for her efforts. Matt began carving the turkey under my mother-in-law's watchful gaze. The bird was undercooked. In her haste to perfect the side dishes, my mother-in-law had left the turkey in the oven for too short a time. The center was raw and could not be salvaged. My mother-in-law's face turned red as whispers filled the room. Aunt Linda, ever practical, suggested cutting off the outer parts and heating them in the microwave to fix it. My mother-in-law seemed horrified at the suggestion, responding sharply that using the microwave for the turkey was beneath her family traditions. Meanwhile, the side dishes were not faring any better. The sweet potato casserole had been out too long and was now lukewarm with a gummy marshmallow coating. The green beans were overcooked, their vibrant green reduced to a dull, unappetizing hue. The stuffing was still too salty despite my mother-in-law's previous adjustments, and the gravy was lumpy. As the family awkwardly sampled their plates, the conversation turned tense. Someone mentioned last year's Thanksgiving, hosted by Matt's cousin Claire, and how well it had gone. My mother-in-law looked at Claire with a gaze so sharp it could cut glass, quickly changing the subject to the wine selection she had chosen herself. The critical moment came when my mother-in-law's centerpiece, an imposing arrangement of candles and flowers, toppled over halfway through the dinner. It was unclear who had hit the table, but the impact sent wax spilling onto the tablecloth and petals scattering across the plates. Exclamations of surprise erupted around the table as my mother-in-law stood up, frantically trying to control the situation. In the chaos, a glass of red wine was spilled on the immaculate white carpet. She stood motionless, staring at the stain that spread out like a personal insult. The guests exchanged uncomfortable glances, not knowing whether to help or to stay out of it. It was at that moment that my mother-in-law turned her attention to me. Her eyes were flashing with accusation as she demanded to know why I hadn't stepped in to help sooner. She said it was my fault the evening had gone so badly because I had sat by and done nothing instead of acting like a good daughter-in-law. I was stunned. The accusation was so out of line, so absurd, that for a moment I didn't know how to respond. Matt tried to intervene, saying that his mother was stressed and didn't mean it, but his words only seemed to fuel her anger. She began to list all the ways I had failed her, from not offering to take care of the turkey to not warning her about the unstable centerpiece. I could feel the heat rising to my face as she continued her speech, her voice rising with each word. She accused me of sabotaging her, of deliberately sitting there to let her fail, and prove some kind of point. I looked around for someone to intervene, but the other guests avoided my gaze, clearly uncomfortable. Aunt Linda cleared her throat and suggested we all take a break and enjoy dessert in the living room. But my mother-in-law wasn't finished. She turned to Matt, demanding that he make me apologize. Matt looked torn, caught between his mother's fury and my incredulous expression. He muttered something about everyone needing to calm down, but it was too little, too late. My mother-in-law was already storming out of the room, leaving behind her a trail of tension and silence. After she left, the rest of the family began to silently collect their things. After what had happened, no one wanted to stay for dessert. Uncle Rick muttered something about watching the game at home, while Aunt Linda gave me a sympathetic pat on the shoulder before leaving. Matt and I stayed behind to help clean up, although my mother-in-law was nowhere to be seen. As we loaded the dishwasher, Matt finally broke the silence, saying he didn't understand why his mother had reacted like that. He said she must have been under a lot of pressure and didn't mean what she said. I held my tongue, not wanting to argue, but inside I was furious. This wasn't just about stress. My mother-in-law had made it clear from the start that she didn't think I was good enough, and now that her own dinner had fallen apart, she was trying to blame me. When we finally left, the journey home was silent. Matt seemed lost in his thoughts, and I was too angry to talk. I went over the evening in my mind, wondering if I could have done anything differently. But deep down, I knew the answer. No matter what I did, my mother-in-law would have found a way to criticize me. Update 1. The next day, I was still furious when my phone vibrated with a message from my mother-in-law. She wanted to know if I could go to her house to discuss a family matter. I showed the message to Matt, who shrugged and said I should go, adding that it might be her way of apologizing. I wasn't so convinced. When I arrived at his house, he greeted me with a forced smile and offered me tea, which I declined. He sat down opposite me at the dining room table, his hands carefully intertwined. He began by saying that he had been giving a lot of thought to what had happened and wanted to make things right. For a brief moment, I thought he was really going to apologize, but then he dropped the bomb. She said she had decided that the family needed a second Thanksgiving dinner to erase the memory of the first. And, of course, she wanted me to be the hostess. I looked at her in astonishment. She explained that it was only fair since I hadn't stepped in to help the first time and insisted that it would be an opportunity for me to prove that I could handle the responsibility. She even offered to send me her recipes and come early to guide me through the process. Her tone was condescending, as if she were doing me a favor, and it was all I could do to keep my cool. I told her I would think about it and left as fast as I could, my mind racing between anger and disbelief. When I got home, I told Matt what had happened. He seemed surprised, but said he thought it might be a good opportunity to smooth things over. I couldn't believe that I was on his side again, but I didn't have the energy to argue. That night, as I lay in bed, I made a decision. If I was going to organize Thanksgiving, it would be on my terms, not hers. And if my mother-in-law thought she could control the narrative, she was about to get a big surprise. Update 2. I decided to organize the Thanksgiving dinner too. On the morning of my celebration, I felt a mixture of nerves and determination. If I was going to do it, it would be my way. The stress and spectacle of my mother-in-law's attempt had ruined the joy of the holiday, and I was determined to get it back, at least for myself. My vision wasn't about perfection. It was about warmth, simplicity, and making everyone feel at home. I spent the week planning and preparing, but my focus wasn't on elaborate dishes or over-the-top decorations. Instead, I leaned into what I loved: comfort food, a cozy atmosphere, and relaxed family time. The first change I made was to the seating arrangement. I abandoned the long, formal table in favor of something more intimate. I gathered all the different chairs in the house and borrowed some from the neighbors. The table was set with simple white plates and linen napkins, decorated with small sweets and some candles, without a single imposing centerpiece in sight. For the menu, I set aside the complicated recipes that my mother-in-law had insisted I use. Instead, I prepared the dishes I knew well, the ones I enjoyed cooking. A roast turkey, simply seasoned with butter and herbs, along with a honey-glazed ham as an alternative. The sides were classic but simple: creamy mashed potatoes, green beans with garlic and almonds, and homemade stuffing that didn't involve a single box mix. For dessert, I baked an apple crisp and pumpkin pie the day before, avoiding the frantic last-minute scramble I had seen my mother-in-law suffer. Matt helped where he could, running to the store for last-minute items and keeping me company in the kitchen. I noticed that he seemed more relaxed this time, perhaps because I wasn't giving orders or stressing about every detail. When the first guests arrived, I could feel an immediate change in the atmosphere. Instead of being greeted with rigid instructions and a schedule, they entered a home filled with the aroma of roasting turkey and soft background music. I greeted each person warmly, encouraging them to have a drink from a small bar trolley I had set up in the living room. Aunt Linda arrived first, bringing her famous spinach dip. She looked around and smiled, saying that the house already felt more welcoming than the disaster of the previous week. Uncle Rick was soon following her, balancing a bottle of wine in each hand. He joked about needing both after what he called the Thanksgiving apocalypse. As more relatives arrived, the room filled with laughter and conversation. People mingled freely, sipping cider and sampling the appetizers I had prepared. A simple cheese board, vegetable sticks, and a bowl of my favorite spiced nuts. It wasn't fancy, but it didn't need to be. My mother-in-law arrived with Matt's father about 30 minutes later. I could see from the moment she entered that she was nervous. Her eyes scanned the room, analyzing the casual setting and the relaxed atmosphere. She didn't say much, just handed me a covered plate and muttered something about it being her contribution. I thanked her and placed the plate on the buffet table, resisting the urge to look at what was on it. From her expression, I could see that she was already comparing my efforts with hers, looking for any detail she could criticize. When it was time to eat, I called everyone to the table without much ceremony. My mother-in-law hovered near the kitchen, offering unsolicited advice on how to serve the turkey and arrange the plates. I nodded politely but ignored most of her suggestions, concentrating on making sure everyone had what they needed. The meal itself was everything I had hoped for. People were passing around the dishes, filling their plates, and praising the flavors. Aunt Linda declared the mashed potatoes the best she'd ever tasted. And even Uncle Rick, who was notoriously picky, said the turkey was cooked to perfection. The conversation flowed easily, with stories and jokes filling the room. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was part of the family, rather than a stranger observing from the outside. Even Matt seemed more at ease, laughing along with his cousins and stealing mouthfuls of cake when he thought no one was looking. My mother-in-law, however, was another story. She sat rigidly at the end of the table, picking at her food and occasionally making comments about how she would have done things differently. She mentioned her failed centerpiece, calling it a lesson in overambition, but it was clear she had not gotten over it. At one point, she commented that my green beans were a little too rustic and suggested I use her recipe next time. Aunt Linda interjected that she loved the simplicity and thought it was refreshing not to have everything smothered in cream and cheese. My mother-in-law's smile was strained as she took another bite, clearly holding back. After dinner, I didn't insist on a strict cleaning schedule or assigned tasks. Instead, I encouraged everyone to have dessert and return to the living room. Some people stayed at the table chatting, while others gathered around the fireplace to share old stories over drinks. Matt's younger cousin Emily came up to me at one point and said she hoped I would host again next year. She commented that the whole evening felt more like what Thanksgiving should be about family and connection, not stress and exhibitionism. By the end of the night, even the skeptics seemed convinced. Aunt Linda gave me a big hug before leaving, saying that she hadn't enjoyed Thanksgiving so much in years. Uncle Rick promised to bring even better wine next time, saying that my cooking deserved it. My mother-in-law was one of the last to leave. She stood near the door, her expression unreadable as she thanked me for hosting. She said it was nice to see the family together, and then added that she hoped I hadn't been too overwhelmed. I could see that she wanted me to say it had been difficult, to give some validation to her earlier claims that I couldn't handle it. Instead, I just smiled and said it had been a pleasure, watching her jaw tighten slightly. When the door closed behind her, I let out a deep sigh. Matt came up behind me, put his arms around my waist, and kissed the top of my head. He said he was proud of me and admitted that he hadn't realized how much of a difference the right atmosphere could make. As we finished cleaning up, I couldn't help but feel a sense of accomplishment. I had achieved what I set out to do, create a Thanksgiving that wasn't about proving something or living up to someone else's expectations. It was about family, connection, and showing everyone, including myself, that I was capable in my own way. Update 3. The morning after the dinner, I woke up with a sense of calm and clarity that I hadn't experienced in a long time. Organizing the dinner had been a success, and not just because the food turned out well or the guests had a good time. For the first time, I felt that I had proven something to myself, that I could create a warm and welcoming space without giving in to anyone's impossible expectations. But as I had anticipated, the matter was not over. My mother-in-law has never been one to let things rest. Mid-morning, my phone buzzed with a message from her. She had written a long text, but the first line already indicated where she was going. She felt the need to express how I had undermined her role as matriarch of the family, and that my role as hostess was an attempt to take control. I looked at the screen for a moment before handing the phone to Matt. He quickly checked the message, his face twisting into a grimace. He said it was just her usual way of deflecting attention and not to let it get to me. I replied that I wasn't upset. I had simply had enough of this situation. My mother-in-law's accusations no longer affected me. What had started as insecurity, fed by her constant belittlement, had turned into determination. I told Matt that I was no longer going to interact with her unless it was absolutely necessary. If he wanted to stick to his version of events, that was his decision. Matt nodded but seemed uneasy. He said he would talk to her, but I stopped him. I reminded him that although I appreciated his support, his mother was his responsibility, not mine. Throughout the day, the messages kept coming, each one more dramatic than the last. She claimed that I had disrespected her legacy, ruined family traditions, and created a division between her and her son. At one point, she even accused me of turning Matt against her, a comment that made me laugh out loud. That night, she changed tactics. Instead of messaging me, she started calling Matt. I could hear snatches of their conversation from the other room. Her voice would rise and fall as Matt responded in a calm but firm tone. When he hung up, he seemed exhausted. He said she wanted to make up by inviting us to have coffee the next day. I told him I wasn't interested. He asked if I was sure, saying it might help improve the situation. I replied that although I understood his point of view, I wasn't willing to endure another session of veiled insults and backhanded compliments. I told him he was free to go, but I would stay out of it. Matt went without me, and when he returned, he seemed even more exhausted than when he left. He said my mother-in-law had spent most of the time repeating the same arguments, insisting that I had overstepped the mark and made her look bad. She wanted an apology, not only from me, but also from Matt for allowing it to happen. Matt said he replied that there was nothing to apologize for and that the family had genuinely enjoyed the dinner. He reminded her that the first Thanksgiving was her idea and that I only stepped in when she asked me to. She didn't take it well. Over the next few days, my mother-in-law's behavior became increasingly erratic. One day, she would send long emotional messages, the next day, one-word messages. She tried to rally other family members to her cause, distorting the story to present herself as a victim. But to my surprise, most of the family was not convinced. Aunt Linda, who had been one of her strongest allies in the past, called me to say that she thought I had handled the situation with dignity. She said she appreciated the effort I had put into the dinner and thought it was time for my mother-in-law to get over it. Even Uncle Rick, who normally avoided family dramas like they were the plague, got in touch to say he thought I had done a great job and that he was looking forward to my next Thanksgiving dinner. The support of the family meant a lot, but it was Matt's reaction that mattered most. I noticed a change in him. He began to stand up for me more, resisting his mother's attempts to control and manipulate. One night, after another particularly intense phone call with my mother-in-law, he sat down next to me on the sofa and sighed. He said he was tired of always being in the middle, trying to please everyone. He admitted that he had spent years ignoring his mother's behavior because it was easier than confronting it. I told him I understood, but I also reminded him that his mother's problems were not my responsibility. I explained that although I was willing to support him, I was not going to continue putting myself in situations where I felt disrespected or belittled. Matt agreed. Thanksgiving became a turning point, not only in my relationship with my mother-in-law, but also in how I saw myself. I realized that I didn't need her approval or validation to feel secure in my role within the family. I also learned the importance of setting boundaries, even when it's uncomfortable or causes conflict, especially since it's only been a year since we got married. Update 4. I received an unexpected call from Uncle Rick. When I saw his name on my phone screen, I braced myself for one of his usual jokes. He greeted me with his characteristic energy, asking if I had a free minute. I smiled, knowing that this call would probably be a welcome break from the tense family atmosphere. When I said yes, he immediately moved on to what seemed like a serious request. Rick explained that he needed me to do him a favor, something really important. I raised an intrigued eyebrow and asked him to continue. His voice dropped to a whisper of feigned seriousness, as if he were sharing some big secret. He wanted me to organize a small gathering, but with a special condition. He wanted it to be a secret gathering, without my mother-in-law invited. I was taken aback, blinking at the unexpected request. A secret gathering sounded like the perfect escape from the usual family drama. He confirmed it, adding that it would be a celebration after New Year's, and by the way, his birthday was the day after New Year's. So this would also serve as a birthday party for him. I felt a spark of excitement. A birthday dinner where the only thing that mattered was having fun without worrying about impressing anyone. That sounded perfect. I asked him if he was really asking me to organize his birthday dinner but to keep it a secret. Rick laughed out loud, assuring me that it would be more than just a birthday celebration. It would be about having fun and relaxing together. Rick's tone changed as he explained the details. He wanted a small, informal gathering with everyone bringing their favorite dishes. No fancy seating arrangements, no stress about food and cooking. Just food that people love and enjoy in company. He promised he would take care of the drinks and said that everyone could contribute with side dishes. I could bring my famous dessert and he would take care of the main course. The whole idea was to enjoy each other's company without following a rigid plan or stressing about perfection. I laughed, already feeling the pressure lift. I told Rick I would bring my cakes and even promised to come up with some fun after-dinner games. Rick seemed to be in seventh heaven when I agreed, saying that this was exactly the kind of celebration I had been longing for. Something fun and relaxed, and with no one breathing down their necks about traditions or standards. The more he talked, the better the idea sounded. He would make sure that the real family knew about it and that everything was kept secret. I assured him that I was completely on board, looking forward to the moment. I was genuinely excited about this plan. When I hung up the phone, I couldn't stop smiling. I couldn't wait for this to happen. I was really excited about the idea.